My biological daughter keeps trying to contact me 15 years after closed adoption, but I can't reopen those wounds. I'm 32 now, married, pregnant with twins thanks to IVF, and living a life I'm genuinely proud of. But 16 years ago, I was a completely different person in a completely different world. Back then, I wasn't this put-together adult. I was just a kid trying to survive a nightmare. When I was 16, something happened to me that I still have trouble saying out loud. A distant relative, I won't get into specifics, took advantage of me. It was someone my family trusted, someone who should have been safe. I didn't tell anyone at first because I didn't even have the words for it. I just shut down. I stopped going to school, stopped seeing friends. My mom knew something was wrong, of course, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what. I think I was scared of how it would all explode. And then, about 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I remember staring at that test and feeling like the world was collapsing around me. I was just 16. I didn't even know how to process what had already happened, let alone this. My mom was the first person I told, and honestly, she was the only reason I made it through that year. She stepped up in ways I'll never forget, dealing with the legal stuff, making sure I got therapy, and protecting me from the family gossip mill as much as she could. But even she couldn't stop what came next. I decided to give the baby up for adoption. My mom and I agreed that it was the best option for both me and the baby. I knew I couldn't raise a child when I was still a kid myself, and honestly, I didn't even want to. That probably sounds harsh, but I couldn't look at my pregnancy without being reminded of how it happened. I'm not sure I ever really connected to the idea of being a mom back then. I just wanted it to be over. When I gave birth at 17, I didn't even hold her. That was my choice. The adoption agency had this whole process where you could meet the adoptive parents, take pictures, write a letter for the baby to read when they were older. But I didn't want any of that. I made it clear from the start that I wanted a closed adoption. No contact, no updates, nothing. As far as I was concerned, that chapter of my life was closed the moment I signed the papers. Only a handful of people in my family even know it happened, and we all agreed to keep it that way. For the past 15 years, I've worked hard to move on. Therapy helped a lot more than I thought it would, and over time, I started to feel like myself again. I went to college, met my husband, built a career. The past 5 years especially have been so peaceful. There were stretches where I didn't think about what happened for months at a time. I thought I'd finally found a way to live with it all. But then, a few months ago, everything changed. So, a few months ago, I got a letter in the mail. Nothing unusual about it at first. It was just this plain white envelope with my name and address handwritten on the front. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was from her, my biological daughter. I remember just sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the letter like it might explode. My husband, Chris, came in and asked if I was okay, and all I could do was hand it to him because I couldn't even form a sentence. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as he read it. She introduced herself, her name, her age, a little about her life. She said she'd hired a private investigator to find me and that she wanted to meet. She wasn't angry or demanding in the letter, but she was clearly determined. She said she'd always known she was adopted and had been curious about me for years. She wanted to connect, to understand her roots. She even left her phone number at the end, asking me to call her. I didn't know what to do. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. For so long, I convinced myself that part of my life was over, like it was sealed up in a box I'd never have to open again. But now here it was forcing its way back into my life whether I was ready or not. Chris, God bless him, was super calm about the whole thing. He told me I didn't need to do anything right away and that it was okay to feel overwhelmed. He's always been my rock, and I honestly don't know how I'd handle half the stuff in my life without him. I ended up sitting on the letter for a week before I did anything. I kept going back and forth in my head. Part of me felt like I owed her something, even if it was just an explanation. But the bigger part of me, the scared, traumatized part, wanted to burn the letter and pretend it never happened. In the end, I decided to respond. I wrote her a letter back, mostly to set boundaries. I told her I wasn't interested in meeting, but that I understood her curiosity. I gave her permission to reach out to certain family members if she wanted to learn more about her background. But I made it clear that I didn't want to be involved. I thought it was a fair compromise. She didn't. The next thing I knew, she was calling. Over and over and over again. I don't even know how she got my phone number, but she'd leave these long voicemails, sometimes crying, sometimes just pleading for me to hear her out. It got to the point where I had to block her number. And then she showed up. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was in the middle of making lunch when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked out the window and froze. She was standing there on my porch, holding a folder and looking nervous as hell. I didn't answer the door. I couldn't. I just stood there, heart racing, waiting for her to leave. She knocked a few times, called out, "I know you're in there," but I couldn't bring myself to face her. Eventually, she left, but not before sliding a letter under the door. I didn't read it. I couldn't. I just sat on the floor, staring at it, until Chris came home and found me like that. He read it for me. She said she wasn't trying to upset me, but she felt like she deserved answers. She wanted to know why I gave her up, why I didn't want to see her. She said she didn't care about the circumstances. She just wanted to know me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I told Chris I couldn't handle this anymore. I thought I'd been so clear in my first letter, but it felt like she was just bulldozing through my boundaries. He suggested we talk to my therapist about it, which turned out to be the best decision we could have made. My therapist helped me process the guilt I was feeling and reminded me that it's okay to protect myself. For a while, things seemed to calm down, but then she showed up again. The second time she showed up, it was evening just after dinner. Chris and I were on the couch watching some random cooking show when the doorbell rang again. My stomach dropped instantly. I just knew. Chris got up to answer it, but I grabbed his arm and shook my head. I whispered, "It's her," and he froze too. I thought about staying quiet like last time, but this time she didn't just knock. She started talking through the door. "Please," she said. Her voice cracked a little. "I just need to talk to you. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Chris looked at me, silently asking what I wanted to do. I felt paralyzed. I didn't want to open that door. I really didn't, but I also felt like I couldn't just hide forever. I ended up stepping into the hallway, out of her line of sight, and whispering to Chris, "Tell her I'm not ready. Please." He nodded and opened the door just a crack. "I'm sorry," he said firmly, but not unkindly. "This isn't a good time." She didn't take it well. Her voice got louder, more desperate. "You don't understand. I've been lied to my whole life. I just want to talk to her. I deserve that much." I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped into the bedroom, locked the door, and just sat on the edge of the bed shaking. I could hear Chris talking to her, trying to stay calm, but she wasn't calming down. Eventually, he told her she needed to leave, or he'd have to call the police. That finally got her to go, but not without some parting words. "Tell her she can't hide forever," she said. "I'll wait as long as I have to." When Chris came back upstairs, I was already crying. He sat next to me, wrapped his arms around me, and said, "We'll figure this out. You're not alone in this." But I felt alone, and honestly, I felt angry too. I know that probably sounds awful. She's my biological daughter, after all, but I couldn't help it. I'd set boundaries. I'd been clear. And here she was, blowing past all of that like my feelings didn't matter. That night, Chris and I talked about what to do next. He suggested maybe it was time to have a conversation with her. Not in person, but over the phone or something, just to try and close the door for good. At first, I resisted. I didn't think I could handle it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he might be right. Maybe if I gave her some answers, she'd finally let me go. So, with my therapist's help, I drafted a list of things I was willing to say and things I wasn't. I practiced what I'd say if she asked certain questions. I told myself over and over that this wasn't about reconnecting. It was about protecting myself and my family. The next week, I had Chris call her from his phone. When she picked up, he told her I'd agreed to one phone call. Just one. He set the ground rules. No yelling, no guilt-tripping, no showing up at our house anymore. She agreed. And that's how I ended up having the hardest conversation of my life. I spent the entire day leading up to the call feeling sick to my stomach. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything. Every time I thought about what I was about to do, my chest got tight, and I had to tell myself to breathe. Chris was amazing as always. He stayed right next to me the whole time, reminding me that I was in control and that I didn't have to do anything I wasn't comfortable with. When the time came, I sat on the couch with my notes in front of me. Chris sat next to me, holding my hand. He dialed her number, put it on speaker, and then there she was, Hi, she said, her voice small and hesitant. Is this you? I took a deep breath. It's me, I said. My voice came out shakier than I wanted, but it was out there now. No turning back. For a moment, there was just silence. It was like neither of us knew how to start. Finally, she broke it. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me, she said. I know I've been pushy. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, okay. Not exactly eloquent, but it was all I had. She started by asking the obvious questions. Why I gave her up? Why I didn't want contact. I'd practiced my answers to those, so I stuck to what I'd prepared. I was very young when I had you, I said. I wasn't in a place where I could give you the life you deserved. I made the decision I thought was best for you. And for me. But why didn't you want to know me? She asked. Her voice cracked a little, and I could tell she was crying. Was it something about me? Did I do something wrong? That one hit me hard. I had to take a moment to collect myself before answering. No, I said firmly. It was never about you. You didn't do anything wrong. You were an innocent baby. But the circumstances around your conception were traumatic for me. Being pregnant with you, giving birth, it was all tied to something that caused me a lot of pain. It wasn't your fault, but it was something I couldn't separate in my mind. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her sniffling. I didn't know, she said softly. I knew I was adopted, but my parents always told me this sugar-coated version of the story. They said you were really young and wanted me to have a better life, but they never mentioned anything about trauma. I felt a pang of anger, not at her, but at her adoptive parents. I understood why they'd told her a sanitized version of the story, but it felt like they'd set me up to be the bad guy when the truth came out. I'm sorry they didn't tell you the whole truth, I said. But I need you to understand that this isn't about you. It's about me and what I need to feel safe. There was another long pause, and then she asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you think we could ever have a relationship? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it out loud still felt like a gut punch. No, I said finally. My voice shook, but I forced myself to keep going. I'm sorry, but I don't think that's something I can do. I've spent years trying to heal and move on, and I don't think I can go back to that place. I hope you can understand that. She didn't respond right away, and for a second, I thought she might have hung up. But then she said, I don't understand. I don't think I ever will. But I guess I don't really have a choice, do I? Her words stung, but I knew she was right. This wasn't something I could compromise on, no matter how much it hurt her. We talked for a little while longer. I answered some of her questions about my family history, told her a little about what I was like as a teenager. But I kept it surface level. I didn't want to give her the impression that this was the start of something. I didn't want to give her false hope. By the time we ended the call, I felt completely drained. She thanked me for talking to her, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. I didn't blame her for feeling that way, but I also knew I'd done the right thing for me. After the call, I sat there in silence for a long time. Chris didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around me and let me sit with it. I don't even know how to describe how I felt. Relieved, sad, guilty, exhausted. It was like I'd been holding my breath for months, and now that it was over, I didn't even know how to exhale. The thing is, I thought the call would be the end of it, that she'd get her answers and let me go. But a week later, I got another letter in the mail. This time, it wasn't just from her. It was from her adoptive parents, too. They wrote about how much they loved her and how they were sorry if their version of the adoption story had caused me any distress. But then they went on to say that they thought I should reconsider my decision not to have a relationship with her. They said she'd been struggling emotionally for years, and that meeting me had been something she'd dreamed about her whole life. They said I could make a huge difference in her life if I just gave her a chance. I was furious, not just at them, but at the situation as a whole. I felt like no matter what I said, no matter how many times I explained myself, people were still expecting me to accommodate everyone else's feelings except my own. It was like my trauma, my boundaries didn't matter as long as someone else got what they wanted. That's when I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I tried to be as kind and understanding as I could, but it wasn't enough. They weren't going to let me move on unless I made it impossible for them to keep contacting me. So, Chris and I made a decision. We decided to move. It wasn't an easy choice. We love our house. It's where we've built our life together, where we've planned for our twins to grow up. But at the end of the day, my peace of mind was more important. I couldn't keep living with the constant anxiety of wondering if she'd show up at my door again. We found a new place in a nearby town. Not too far, but far enough. We didn't tell anyone except for my therapist and a few close friends. I changed my phone number, too, and asked my family not to share it with anyone. I even locked down my social media accounts so she couldn't try to contact me there. The move was exhausting, especially being pregnant, but once we were settled into the new house, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I felt safe. It's been a few weeks now, and things are starting to feel normal again. I still think about her sometimes, about how much pain she must be in, about how much I wish things could be different. But I know I made the right choice for me and my family. I've fought too hard to reclaim my life to let it be derailed now.